27 minutes to 8. So, HS2 is going to happen. It'll be announced today, £32 billion to be spent on building a high-speed rail service between London and Birmingham. That's the first phase, then it'll be extended to Manchester and Leeds. But it is all a long way off. The first phase won't start for 5 years, and it'll be 14 years before the first passenger gets on the first train. That's the plan anyway. And it is highly controversial because of the damage objectors say it'll do to the environment. Here's our chief political correspondent, Gary O'Donoghue.
Nestling in the picturesque Chiltern Hills, northwest of London, is Shardalow's farm.
We've got 500 acres, about 70 horses.
The HS2 route would run within a stone's throw of Tony Williams' farm and equestrian centre. And despite being a local Conservative councillor, he's furious with his party leadership.
It'll totally disrupt the infrastructure of Amersham and the area around it for 5 years. So I suppose you could say with the blight now lasting 5 years till they start to construct, along with the 5 years of work, tunnelling, spoil, the average occupant in this area will lose, 15% of their life.
The campaigners insist their opposition is not NIMBYism. But those who fought for the line, such as Susan Williams of the Campaign for High-Speed Rail, call their opposition short-sighted.
In the Victorian times, I'm sure that people didn't want a railway built through their countryside, and ditto in the 21st century. The West Coast Main Line was built and everyone's very happy with it, and I'm sure ultimately in the long term people will see that this was a good thing.
Susan Williams has the government behind her, and Labour is in general in favour of the line. But the Prime Minister has internal problems over HS2. His Welsh Secretary, Cheryl Gillen, has threatened to resign the whip if a bill before Parliament threatens to bulldoze her Chesham and Amersham constituency. Her local party chairman, Andrew Garnett, says 15 other nearby seats, packed full of Tory activists, are also up in arms.
People are very, very upset. People feel they have been ignored. People feel they're being abandoned by the party that they have supported for all of their lives in many cases. Those seats in the past have provided a lot of resource for the party nationally to fight in marginal seats, because actually it takes bodies to run a campaign as much as it takes money. If people were to choose to sit on their hands, that could damage our chances in 2015.
Chesham and Amersham Conservatives have withheld thousands of pounds from the party's central coffers in protest, and other associations have done the same. The pressure seems to have caused some modifications to the plan, with ministers expected to announce an extended tunnel in Cheryl Gillen's constituency at a cost of £500 million, or £190,000 a yard. Andrew Garnett again.
I don't think the tunnelling answers the concerns that the people along the line have about HS2. Yes, it may ameliorate some of the damage, but there are many more fundamental issues with this scheme.
Back at Tony Williams' farm, the horses are heading for the stables. The only other sound is the crows nesting in a nearby wood. He's full of contempt for Tory transport ministers, past and present.
This is a disaster, and there's little thought gone into it. The previous Minister of Transport, Hammond, really, the only possible reason he could want an HS2 link is to get back to the planet on which he obviously is living.
The campaigners are adamant that today's announcement isn't the end of it. Some are threatening years of battles in the courts.
Gary O'Donoghue, well, our Deputy Political Editor James Landale's on the line. Is there anything that can stop this now, James?
Oh yes, we're only at the beginning of the process here. I fully expect there will be a legal challenge. Certainly opponents and councils up and down the line are certainly considering taking this to the courts. They will seek judicial review of the way the consultation was carried out, the nature of the environmental impact, the compensation packages that have been suggested. All of that, I think, will go through the courts. Unless, by some miracle, the opponents are satisfied with what the Secretary of State for Transport announces today. And then once that has happened, depending on the result, it would then go into Parliament as a piece of legislation. Remember, this is a piece of hybrid legislation, which basically means it doesn't just affect public policy, the whole nation as a whole. It also affects individuals. And that means this is very, very slow, detailed process. And I think the key test will come for the government when this gets into the Commons and the Lords 2013, 2014 is how much will does the government have to push this through Parliament at a time when there will be other competing priorities, House of Lords reform, other things like that, and we'll be heading up towards a general election. I think that's when we'll see whether the government is really genuinely committed to this.
But I suppose the big difference between this and something like runway 3, the third runway at Heathrow Airport, is that the Labour Party is on side. I mean, there is political consensus.
Yes, up to a point, Lord Copper. The Labour Party say this is an important milestone today. They want it to. They say that it wants to be taken forward on a cross-party basis. However, two things. One is Labour says that the government should also make a commitment to go beyond Birmingham, to Manchester and to Leeds, and at the moment the plan would be for the legislation simply to be about the route from London to Birmingham. So there are some in Labour who say, look, we need to have a commitment for the whole shebang, not just up to Birmingham. And secondly, Labour also are still pushing an alternative route. They think that it should nip down to Heathrow before going up to Birmingham, and that way would substantially take out a lot of the controversial areas in the Chilterns between London and Birmingham.
So could politics derail it?
Potentially. I mean, we've got a long way to go on this. At the moment, the government is making clear that it is absolutely committed to it, that there is a real need for it on a sort of capacity basis. The government says demand will go up. You simply have to have a high-speed rail line to meet that extra demand. They insist there is a business case. Opponents dispute that. And also, I think the reason at the moment why there is political drive behind it is if you just look at what the Prime Minister says when he's asked about this, and he said this quite recently, it's actually it's not just about shaving off a few minutes for businessmen going between London and Birmingham. It is, in his view, a specific regional policy which, to use his words, will shrink the size of the country and ensure everybody can enjoy economic prosperity and growth. So in other words, it's about a broader strategic vision for the country in the government's eyes, as well as being part of the growth package of trying to regenerate the country. But this is a long-term issue.
James, thanks a lot.